Yeah, I think there's a lot to physics that has not been properly explored because I call it the Mowgli effect. After the discovery of the atom bomb, whatever reigning paradigms of physics were in vogue at that time that were given credit for the discovery of the bomb became enshrined in a kind of untouchable glass, like the holy of holies of scientism. And we kind of sealed it off and said, okay, nobody touched the physicists, especially the elite, because they've discovered a world-changing, world-destroying power in their minds and their equations. And I think it created a kind of like a anthropological reverence that the human species almost unduly put into the theoretical physicists' hands. It was actually the engineers that really do a lot of these things that the physicists get credit for. And I think kind of encasing relativity and quantum into kind of an untouchable paradigm that we can't really we can't think outside of that, I think has slowed down the rate of innovation that physics could help us explore, like we were kind of on the trajectory for before we went off in the World War II, era, the new order that was established with the bomb,
And in many ways, that was when the government created big, untouchable science.
Right. It was kind of like the bomb was kind of like the founding moment of the order that we're in now, right? It was like the founding myth.
But I think there had been a pressure in that direction with the logic of math behind the quantizing digital approach or the analog approach. And I think the reality basically sees causality the way Norbert Wiener saw it in analog manner, and the government coming along with the power to enforce the digital thinking, because it overrides the judgment of the individual who's doing the experiment and observing. It makes it all just mechanical.
Interesting.
There's no criticism possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of Marshall McLuhan's "The Medium is the Message." Have you ever looked into his work with the media?
Oh yeah.
Do you think he was on the money with what he was talking about? I mean, he obviously didn't see where we're at today, but we are in a completely,
Yeah, sometimes he got a little formalistic and idealistic and essentially abstracting it too much, but his heart was in the right place.
Right. Yeah. So you think that we've got too much digital thinking from government and not enough analog? Is that what you're...
Essentially, any is too much when it's under the control of government. Norbert Wiener's fate at MIT was very representative. He rejected money from the military for his research, but there was absolutely nothing wrong with his analog form of cybernetics and causality. But the Pentagon wanted obedience and digitalizing use of computers, and so they pushed Noam Chomsky to the foreground and just totally obscured Wiener's approach.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how there's a lot of sketchy origins for a lot of the big digital platforms like Google and stuff having a kind of relationship to some of the intelligence groups of our government,
Total creations of them.
Yeah.
Nothing creative, just imposed doctrine Chomsky's so-called linguistics was absolutely unworkable. It simply destroyed what was known about linguistics and was utterly fraudulent, but just by arrogance and Pentagon money, he changed the way universities teach language and linguistics in a way that doesn't work at all.
How did that shape the world we're in today? You know, that move.
In 1968, I did a student-initiated course at the University of Oregon in which we asked a well-known professor from each of 10 departments to present a one-week lecture on how what was the most important contribution of his department to understanding the nature of man. And there were people from linguistics, anthropology, literature, sociology, philosophy, 10 separate disciplines. And after about the third lecture, a student came up and said, "This is a joke, isn't it?" Because everyone was saying Chomskyism was their department's best contribution to understanding the nature of humanity.
Interesting.
And it turned out every one of the 10 had that view already in 1968. And already in 1960 or 62, when I was working on it, it was obvious that it was a fraud.
A deliberate fraud?
Yeah. One of his students politely brought up one of his phrases was these rules generate language, and they pointed out that nothing is generated, that you can't know which rule to apply until you know what the form of the language is you want to explain. And he said, of course, to generate is used in the mathematical sense of to account for.
Right.
But he was in his public statements saying to generate describes a creative mechanism in the brain, a genetically installed set of rules, and that these rules are explaining the creative generation of previously unproduced language. But then one of his flight students got him to say, well, no, he just means to generate in the sense of account for.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's interesting because Chomsky is presented as like an anti-establishment figure for the left, but he's really kind of a court jester, in your opinion, huh?
Yeah. His most recent thing about that people who refuse to be vaccinated should be socially isolated, and someone said, well, who would take care of them, basically? How would they survive if they were isolated utterly? And he said that's their concern.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. What do you think of some of these other figures that have become kind of godfathers of where we are now in our culture? I'm thinking about folks like Herbert Marcuse. He worked with the OSS, and he ended up becoming a big figure, in my opinion, for the development of what we think of with these, in the influence of the Frankfurt School in the development of what they popularly call social justice movements today. Is that by design as well, by these powerful forces to create these critical theory?
I think so. Getting away from the basic idea of class and honest humanitarian judgment. There was no conflict between the formal Marxism and the communitarian Christian ideals of social morality, but under the influence of the government, the secret services, the personalized ideas of politics were used very deliberately to distract attention from the basic things of class, power, and justice.
Right. Yeah. So you would say, would you lump some of the French postmodernists that came over with the big wave that hit academia in America? I'm thinking 60s and 70s and all that. With
the CIA was big in that.
Why?
It was abstracting. It was confusing, distracting from the simple, practical approach to politics, and the deconstructionism, and a lot of it just became mystical garbage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Mystical garbage. Are you familiar with the work of Slavoj Žižek?
Say it again.
Slavoj Žižek.
Oh yeah. He's sort of a maniacal talker. Very, very fun to listen to, but it doesn't seem to have much traction getting anywhere.
Right. So, do you think the whole postmodern project is in terms of its intellectual effect on America has been a something the CIA and other forces have put into our politics to scramble the powerless and confuse them?
I think so.
And what is their purpose of doing that? Is the anti-establishment right would say, oh, that's because they were planning a communist takeover of America. That there's a long march through the institutions, and so this is all part of that process. And then
I think it was just to insert their weakening slant on things. I can't think of his first name, but a former professor in Ethiopia and author, very interesting libertarian. You can find his articles on. I think my brain is getting tired. On the libertarian.
Lou Rockwell, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Lou Rockwell. And Cummings. Cummings is his name.
Ivor Cummings. Yeah. Uh-huh.
No. Ivor.
No.
But he showed how the CIA took over the anti-apartheid movement, inserted sexual politics and everything except simple justice thinking. And Cummings has a very detailed analysis and history of the South African role of the CIA and how it interacted with the new left politics in the U.S.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, how America, you mentioned Ethiopia, and I interviewed Prince Ermia Selassie, the grandson of Emperor Haile Selassie, and the story of how Emperor Selassie was basically set out to die by the American establishment in Ethiopia, and this, Soviet-backed uprising. But it's really, if you actually look at it, a lot of the intellectuals that were stirring up the Ethiopian, revolt and ultimate killing of Emperor Selassie were people who came from America, intellectual new left thinkers that were coming over and radicalizing the population. And of course, Emperor Selassie had his flaws, but he certainly did a lot to try to, push back against colonialism in Africa. And he's, becomes a victim of America's foreign policy as well. So what is the, what is the animating force behind these institutions? Do they have a motivating vision of the world, that a kind of religious imposition that they want to remake the world in a certain way? Are they ideologically motivated? The people who are
things like white racism in Darwinism and the through the Eugenics tradition, Imperialism, and the whole profession of anthropology was motivated by this very strong trend of English racism.
And that's what's moving the CIA's actions through the recent history in America, you would say?
Major strain of it. The ruling class through the end of the 19th and for most of the 20th century was dedicated to genocide through eugenics. And it was only in 1945 when Hitler became a scapegoat for just about everything that American genetics people had to take the word eugenics out of their lexicon. The American Journal of Genetics changed its name suddenly in 1945 to Human Genetics, but exactly the same racist, white supremacist ideas were permeating the whole so-called science of genetics and of anthropology that was applied policy of the ruling class, largely recruited from places like Yale into the CIA, blurring, essentially denaturing the evils of the assumptions behind genetics.
Right. But you say that they are motivated by white supremacy, but that's the number one thing they call everything today. Joe Biden said his number one enemy is white supremacy. And, you hear about the critical theorists talking about institutional white supremacy, and they're rooting it out with these organizations, Black Lives Matter and all these different things.
It's a very fraudulent kind of justice movement, though. That doesn't really do anything.
So is it just a classic projection? You project to your victims what you're doing, what you believe, and what you want?
Basically, the same way that the journals had to drop the word eugenics, the whole culture realizes that it isn't popular to talk white supremacism, but it's still their basic policy to create it.
Now, do you believe that this is like people feel like this great reset is a part of this kind of controlled demolition of the American economy, and a shift towards a new kind of globally managed?
Yeah, exactly. All of these threads became very open with the World Economic Forum, Rockefeller Institute, and several other foundations have been saying it very openly that population reduction and destruction of the existing economy have to go together. And Klaus Schwab just openly said that the COVID epidemic came along just in time because the climate change wasn't working fast enough. So now we've got something down that can significantly move towards destroying the economy in just 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, we're seeing constant supply chain disruptions and baby formula shortages. Of course, those baby formulas are filled with toxic PUFAs, as you would say. And the Ukraine war is not just a part of the way to destroy the economy and get hunger to come on massively within a matter of a few weeks. We're right on the edge now of the southern hemisphere hunger epidemics because of the war, or because of the sanctions for the war, but they totally whitewash the origins of the war. The West's reasons for supporting the Victoria Nuland and her Maidan revolution, that was to impose a change of constitutional law on the Ukraine, because they had passed laws to protect the small or medium-sized farmers who wanted to produce the traditional crops, not genetically modified, and the West wanted to destroy those laws to rewrite the Constitution so that Monsanto could write the laws and require the privatization of all of the productive land, so that Monsanto could provide their Roundup and resistant seed for essentially Monsanto's sake. And the coup people have been steadily working on that to knock out the protective laws put in the Monsanto laws, and that at the same time this was happening, Europe had put out instructions to boycott American genetically modified grains and the policy of Monsanto. So there is a conflict between U.S. GMO policy and European GMO policy, fighting it out within this coup change in the Ukraine, and Russia had been even more consistent in avoiding Monsanto's laws and GMO
than Europe even. So if you see the Russian policy favored by a losing battle of Europe against American GMO production, that puts the U.S. Increasingly against the Russian and the tentative European boycott of GMO.
Mm. Do you think that's the main driving issue, is the GMO thing in Ukraine?
Well, it was the major thing for the coup
in 2014. Okay.
Yeah, and gradually back and forth, putting in Monsanto's laws.
How do you rank that? How do you rank that issue compared to like the IMF loan issue and all that? You know about
the which?
Well, the Ukrainian government, making a decision to be more closely connected to Russia's oligarchs versus the EU's oligarchs financially and the debt obligations they would have to pay to the IMF.
Well, the IMF and World Bank are the major forces in enforcing Monsanto's privatization of the wheat and the oligarchs tend to go with the privatization, but the Russian policy is still consistent against GMO.
Mm. Now, another thing that they've been pushing lately in the media that you never saw before like this, well, I guess it's been a long time since the mainstream media talked about it, is the UFO thing. I mean, remember the media used to talk about the UFOs flying over the White House. Was that, when was that? Was it 1950s? Or was that when Eisenhower was president?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it goes off and they do this announcement that there's nothing here. And then, and so it's become kind of a tabloid subject. And now all of a sudden, CBS and 60 Minutes, and they've done a congressional hearing now just a couple weeks ago, that they're revisiting this UFO thing, and they're saying it's these objects that are tic-tac in shape, and they move way beyond hypersonic speed. They can go in the water and go back up into the space and like almost instantly. I've actually interviewed some of the naval people who have reported these events themselves. They seem to be credible and genuine in their reports of what they saw. But I wonder what this all is. Is this is this a government hoax? Is this just a bunch of eyewitnesses all getting it collectively wrong? I mean, we look back into the records of American history, we see in earlier decades, in the 50s, naval pilots reporting flying lozenges. They didn't have the word for tic-tac established as well as we call them now, these tic-tac objects, So they've been seeing these objects for a long time. So if that was some kind of secret technology from China or Russia, that would be hard to believe they had that back then. What do you think is this story? Is this a hoax from the government or what?
I've had my own few experiences, like when I was in the 7th grade, my mother had been out at night hanging laundry, and she said she just saw something very strange. There were 9 green luminous objects. It was about 9:30 at night, and they were silently moving across the sky towards the north. And the next morning in the paper in Portland, about 5 minutes or 10 minutes later than that, the same reports came out. And so they were traveling at something around 1,000 miles an hour in a group, and no more made. No more was made of those sightings, but except that looking, following the trajectory, there had been a little earlier in the southwest area, as if on the same trajectory. Again, the same 9 luminous green triangles.
Huh. So what do you make of that? I mean, I was wondering if that's something that the government's pushing to try to, scare us into to the new hysteria, but you're saying it might be something or real, or how could they have that kind of technology so long and not?
Yeah, that was very fast for the around 1950,
Mm-hmm.
And in the 1970s, I think it was, I was driving out this way, south side of the city, and there had been a grocery store chain with one of those, like a gas stations,
Mm-hmm.
very tall aluminum tower with a sort of a plastic bubble side at the top, enclosing fluorescent tubes, so the sign was luminous to some extent during the day, but driving along out of the side of my eye, I saw what looked like one of these luminous plastic pods about where the tower would have it, but it was in the daylight and a very, just like a brightly illuminated white or silvery pod, roughly the shape of one of those signs, shield-like shape. And I watched it, assuming that it was an actual illuminated sign seeming to move as the car moved along, but suddenly I saw there was no stem attaching it, and as instead of rising as I approached it, it started dipping towards the horizon and slipped down behind the hills. So at the distance of the hills, it would have been 200 feet tall or something, and in orbit that much bigger.
Wow.
And I looked in the papers for anything about it, and some very different areas, Northern California, I think it was, said that there had been some experiment, basically unexplained what they were doing, but the government said they had done something. But it was a very spectacular, huge luminescence in the daylight.
Is it your personal opinion that that's just these things could be government technology that they've had for a long time? You don't believe it's extraterrestrials or something like that?
I consider the possibility, but so far I think it's more likely that some of them are maybe natural phenomena, others are government things that are covered up.
And why do you think the government is coming out publicly in their favorite state media outlets like CBS to talk about these things as real phenomena now? What's in their interest to do that?
I don't know now.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, I really appreciate your time. I don't want to take up much more of it. Just I guess I wanted to get a baseline of your thoughts about where we are today in current events. Do you have any kind of prognostications? Are you hopeful about the future in the long term, or do you think things are going to steadily go downhill for a long period of time in America, at least, or do you believe it's very open, the choices?
It has been made open by the conspirators themselves these last 10 years or so, and I think the fact that the public is now just at the fringes starting to talk about it and recognize that just because it seems impossibly huge as a conspiracy, that they're really considering that the conspiracy could be that evil and that huge.
Wow.
So I think that's a potential glimmer of hope.
Do you believe the ultimate goal of the Great Reset is kind of a Malthusian reduction in the population and consolidation of markets under cartel control?
Yeah. The faster reduction of population, the better, and the destruction of the mere economy that has supported billions of people. They don't need that.
They want a lot more space for themselves and their friends.
Yeah, and a better ratio of power and force.
Do you think that's what's behind the metaverse, the Facebook creation of these virtual reality, where you're going to supposedly want to stay on this virtual reality world 24/7?
Oh yeah. Have you read any of Eric Schmidt's papers or talks since he was openly working for the Pentagon?
Oh, the Google guy?
Yeah.
What's he doing now? What's he talking? Is this after Google or before Google?
In 2019, he emerged from the Pentagon as the head of an agency of artificial intelligence, and was actually saying these things, that we have to destroy the existing economy so that we can more quickly have total control through artificial intelligence.
A lot of people believe that we're already basically controlled by artificial intelligence because of how much these algorithms control the population's moods and hysterias and manias, through algorithmic manipulation in Google and Facebook and Twitter, setting the tone for what people think and feel.
And election control.
Right. So is there any way to, do you have any prescriptions about how to break free from this stuff? Is it just freedom or education, enlightenment, innovation,
encouraging everyone to investigate and talk about it.
Right. Do you land on a kind of a political conclusion, a libertarianism or anarcho something? There's all kinds of anarcho groups that you see out there,
One important thing is to stop being divided and conquered, to stop worrying about competitors, and realize that essentially it's everyone against Schmidt and Schwab and Gates.
Wow. And how do you think is the best way to beat them at their power game? Because they want people to react violently, because that's how they're able to create more power. Look at what they've done with the January 6th riot. They've milked that as a religion for them, as a kind of remembrance of their sacred temple being sullied by the unwashed masses from flyover country that weren't supposed to be anywhere near that temple,
everyone has to start recognizing that we're all deplorables,
right?
And stop squabbling among ourselves and focus on the very, very few people who are actually doing it.
Do you believe that the action, that positive change, can happen through the electoral process, or does it happen by creating a counter, like an alternative economy, an alternative food system? That, like, is it action in that way of organizing a society outside of their grid?
I think we have to have direct reorganization.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your. What's that?
The Google control of everything through their algorithms, I think makes the election change meaningless.
Yeah. What do you think about Bitcoin as a solution, or these cryptocurrencies?
I don't think there's anything there. If anything, it's probably a creation of the NSA, or who's ultimately in control of the internet, and I don't think there's such a thing as real secrecy.
Right. Do you believe? Are you a fan of gold and silver as a real money, a hard asset that actually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In practical amounts.
Right.
A mixture of it, because silver is too heavy to carry around a large amount of wealth, and gold is so hard to negotiate without the government recognizing it.
Right. Yeah, I think that I think what you're saying is accurate. That we need to get out of the false dialectic and kind of embrace. It's just so hard, They put so many triggering things that divide people. The newest thing that has been inflammatory is trying to normalize children to embrace gender reassignment surgery, and hormone blockers at 5 years old and 6. They're taking toddlers into drag queen bars where there's a lot of, very sexualized content and stuff. That kind of stuff makes it very difficult for, your average, rather conservative family to get along with the leftists that are kind of buying into these cultural identity markers. How do you overcome that?
Start fixing the so-called left. Recognize that it's a deliberate ploy of the institutions, the government, and foundations.
Interesting. Is there a good left you like, or like where do you point people to read or learn from? Philosophers
to look back at the 100 or so years of what the terms mean, and why they have lost their meaning so totally.
What do you make of this new right that's emerging on the right, Is that another controlled opposition, or is there something there?
Most of it, I think, is manipulated, fraudulent, misleading the public.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, it's hard to navigate and have discernment to know where do you get your best accurate information from.
The Trump thing was very powerful at confusing people on what is left and what is right.
In that regard, it was a good thing because it scrambled people's normal patterns, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I I think we're living through what could be a very, very difficult and dangerous time for America. I think that the folks who run these globalist institutions are treating America like a fire sale. When your store's closing, everything's half off. It's vultures are coming and starting to pick apart. And it's happened for a long time now, but you can really start to see a lot of the sheen and the veneer of comfort and wealth in America really start to fray right now. And I think it's a very apocalyptic moment, so to speak, in the true sense of the word, of unveiling that which was hidden, Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the work of René Girard, the anthropologist that taught at Stanford?
No.
Yeah, he was an anthropologist that I think you would like his work. He believed that all culture and language was all mediated on hidden victims, this sacrificial mechanism, what he called the scapegoat mechanism, that societies are constantly on the hunt to, devour a scapegoat to maintain the sense of differentiation and order. And that's kind of the heart and soul of the social contract, and everything we consider to be modern is really a vestige of the sacred of sacrificial ritual. So I think that's kind of where we're at right now. This whole process is falling apart, and they're trying to hunt for scapegoats, and it's not working.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Peat, I appreciate your time. And how can people stay in touch to read your work? I always like to let you share with people where they can contact you.
My website is always there, repeated at repeat.com.
Well, very good. Thanks again, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.